Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of the Idaho House Republicans podcast, where you get to learn a little bit more about the legislators that you have sent to the State House. And today we're very grateful to have with us Representative David Cannon. And David is from Legislative District 30. He sits in Seat A and he is in his third term. Welcome to the Idaho House Republicans podcast, David Cannon.
Thank you so much, Vic. It's great to be here.
Let me tell you a little bit about David before we get into some questions. He is a graduate of Blackfoot High School in 1987. He got an economics degree from BYU in 1992. He went to the University of Utah Law School, which he graduated in 1995. And I don't know where he came up the name for this business that you have, but it's called Cannon Law. And I think that might be named after you, and you're the president, which makes sense.
Right on.
And the best part, of course, that you were married to the lovely Lisa. You have 4 grown children. And how many grandchildren do you have?
We have 8 right now and loving every one of them.
Because I read your bio and you said your 8 best friends. And I was wondering if that included your children or they were the separate for the grandkids. And so it's
Just
8
the grandkids. Just the grandkids.
And you are a criminal defense attorney by trade.
Yes, sir.
And so let's talk, let's start with your district. So you represent Legislative District 30. So you can tell us a little bit about Legislative District 30. What's it like? Is it rural, urban, bedroom community? And what do people in Legislative District 30 care about? Why have they sent you to the State House?
Yes, thank you. So Legislative District 30 is Bingham County and Butte County. The big city of our district is Blackfoot. And so, it's mostly rural, but we do have a growing community in Blackfoot that is the county seat of Bingham County. I believe that as far as legislators go, that I'm a little bit more, some of the things I bring to the table are that I'm pretty thoughtful and I'm not too quick to judge, and I like to hear both sides of the story. I think that somehow my training as a criminal defense attorney kind of influences that tendency, and I think that the folks of Legislative District 30 appreciate that.
Well, hearing all the evidence in a case is always a smart thing to do.
Right on. Yeah, I think that's true.
So let's talk a little bit about the committees that you are assigned to. Tell people about the 3 committees on which you serve.
Yes, thank you. So I chair the House Revenue and Taxation Committee. That's my morning committee. In the afternoon, I sit on the Agriculture Committee and also Business.
Now, just so people for inside baseball, how does one become a chair? How does that happen?
Yeah, so that's at the discretion of the Speaker of the House. I took a little bit of a funny route to being chairman in that I mean, most times those assignments are made at the start of a session. In my case, we had a vacancy in House leadership in the Republican caucus, and the chairman of Rev and Tax, Jason Monks, filled that.
Became the majority leader.
Became the majority leader, and that created a vacancy in House Rev and Tax. I was the vice chair at the time, and I was quote unquote promoted to to chairman.
It's quite an honor, and it's a very important, obviously very important committee for the state. So congratulations.
Thank you. I'm humbled and honored to serve in that capacity.
And people should know in general that if you're in leadership, you are almost never assigned the chairmanship, or I don't believe assigned a chairmanship of a committee, because I figure you have a lot to do as leadership.
Yes, that's been traditionally the case. You're one or the other, but typically not both.
So let's talk about, you're a criminal defense attorney by trade, and for example, our good compatriot Dory Healy is one of the few. She's few medical people. You bring in a unique perspective to the State House. You mentioned a little bit about how it informs you, but can you talk a bit about why you think your background is particularly good for the legislative body, and then also what issues you're likely to bring that maybe others won't?
Sure. So as a criminal defense attorney, I think that I do have a unique lens through which I view some issues. A couple of years ago, we had a pretty good debate going in the state about mandatory minimums, for instance.
Right.
That's an issue that I just see a little bit differently than most people, especially in the in the Republican Party just because of my 30 years practicing law in criminal law, either as a prosecutor for several years or for a defense attorney for several years. And anyway, I don't begrudge anyone their views on mandatory minimums. I certainly think that fentanyl and other banned substances are a scourge and need to be dealt with. My time as a criminal defense attorney has kind of influenced me to believe that there are better ways to deal with an issue like that than long prison terms, because I think that oftentimes prison terms result in people getting to be more hardened in their ways and in their views and in their criminal activity during their stay in prison, and they come out and we haven't addressed the problem. So anyway, I'm a proponent of drug courts and things that try to rehabilitate people, and that's kind of a perspective that I bring from my background.
So in terms of like the fentanyl bill, right? I remember your debate. You could tell you were wrestling with where you would ultimately come out. I think you were ultimately a yes on the mandatory minimums with fentanyl. Just tell people about how you kind of came to that point, even though you had those concerns.
Yes. I agreed with everyone that fentanyl is an epidemic in Idaho, and I felt like we needed to do something. In the process of debating that through the committee and so forth, I felt like there were better approaches out there that include drug courts and rehabilitation and so forth. But I agreed that we needed to do something, and in the end, that something turned out to be this mandatory minimum bill. That's what I got the chance to vote yes or no on the House floor, and I did vote yes for it.
But we need to send obviously clear signals when it comes to drug use in our state. You probably know that Idaho is the last absolute prohibition state on marijuana. And,
Yes, sir.
That's actually not a bad differentiation between the other states.
I totally agree.
So, and let's talk about a couple of other bills. Well, let's talk about one that you're currently running, and that is House Bill 713, and it would require health companies to apply towards insured copay and deductibles. Talk about that bill, why you brought it, and tell people about it and its prospects.
Yes, thank you. So a few years ago, before I got into politics, I helped organize and run a charity marathon in my legislative district. And the group that we were trying to help was a cystic fibrosis group.
Yes.
In that process, I got to meet a family that are constituents of mine, the Drollingers. They have a daughter who has cystic fibrosis. And anyway, I lost contact with them for a few years, but they reached out to me last year, actually, and brought to my attention this idea that there are certain maladies, cystic fibrosis being one of those, where there are very expensive medications that are needed.
Right.
And anyway, they had an issue that they wanted me to look at where there are third parties that pay part of the cost of a prescription medication. In this case, it was a pharmaceutical company that paid through a coupon. And the practice of many health insurance companies in terms of billing has incorporated copay accumulators, which don't apply that third-party payment to the copay or to the out-of-pocket maximum of the insured. And they thought it was pretty unfair, and I looked at it and I agreed. I thought it was super unfair that would not be applied to their copay or out-of-pocket maximum, that the health insurance company would basically get the benefit of those payments and at least partially leave the patient out in the cold with regard to those. And so this legislation would fix that. It would make it so that health insurance companies cannot apply a copay accumulator when receiving payments on behalf of an insured.
So tell people specifically about how that process works. So the patient is going out and actually getting that discount through a third party through their own efforts. And then how does it not credited to them for that effort? And I think that's your point.
Yeah, that's my point. And it can be like I say, there are pharmaceutical companies that want their own drug to be used, and so they'll give help in the form of a coupon. There's also charitable organizations out there who help patients make payments sometimes, and so those are third parties. Anyway, these policies, these billing policies are, in essence, if it comes from a third party, we're going to treat that as different than coming from the patient themselves, and we're not going to give them credit toward their out-of-pocket maximum or their copay.
Right. So in de facto, it's increasing that copay dramatically.
Yes.
Because the insurance company is benefiting from the efforts a lot of times of the patient or a third party that wants to bless someone who's suffering.
That's exactly right. Interestingly, there's bipartisan bill in the U.S. Congress that would address this, that's kind of working its way through. 25 states on a state level have passed copay accumulator bills that would do what we're trying to do here. And there's a group, a coalition of nonprofits called All Copays Count, which is a group of about 80 nonprofits who are all joined together to try to get this practice, which is, pretty egregious in my view, banned.
Well, thank you for your work on that. Tell people what committee that's going through.
So that was introduced in the House Health and Welfare Committee. I anticipate that we'll have a public hearing on that in the next few days.
And that's Chairman Vanderwoude's.
Yes, sir.
Fantastic. Well, Godspeed on that. It's great work.
Thank you very much.
Let's talk about House Concurrent Resolution 25, and it's dealing with the Balanced Budget Amendment and Article 5 Constitution Conventional Call. Not the intention to make a constitutional convention call in this case, but talk about HCR 25 and your thoughts on it.
Yes, thank you.
And you debated on the floor on this.
I did, and it was kind of a fun coincidence. I felt that we debated that on the House floor on President Reagan's birthday.
Yes.
And so he had been a proponent of a balanced budget amendment. He wanted to achieve that through congressional action, but he had gone on record as saying, if we can't get it done through a congressional action, we have as a fallback this idea of an Article 5 convention. So the fact that fell on his birthday really motivated me to stand up and debate it. I had a lot of fun with that, and then it was fun that we cleared the House by 36-34 vote that day.
Right.
And so we didn't have any votes to spare, so it was a lot of drama. I do feel strongly that the national debt is the number one threat that our country faces as far as our Constitution, as far as our freedoms, as far as our way of life goes. And I think that we've got to do something. I think that joining the list of red states who are calling for a constitutional convention on this issue is the right thing for Idaho to do. Interestingly, and I'll just say, the arguments against it oftentimes lead to kind of questions about how that's going to look, and they point out that Article 5 of the Constitution is fairly vague with regard to how that's going to look procedurally. And I've given a lot of thought to that. The Constitution itself, as well as the Bill of Rights, is intentionally vague. And if you would have asked the founders how some of the rights in the Bill of Rights, for instance, would be applied, they would have kind of said, I don't know, and they left that vague because they wanted the Constitution to be a living document. In my line of work as a criminal defense attorney, the Fourth Amendment comes to mind. There's a Fourth Amendment which protects us against unreasonable searches and seizures.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights don't flesh that out in terms of how that's going to look. We have case law from courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court, and decisions on the Fourth Amendment, which would fill this room, which have over time told us what exactly the Fourth Amendment means.
And what it isn't, what it doesn't mean.
Exactly,
Right.
What it does mean, what it doesn't mean. But to criticize the founders for passing and for signing off on the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights because they weren't sure exactly how it was going to play out, in my mind, is short-sighted. I believe that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are divinely inspired, and I feel like even though it's somewhat vague in terms of how it would play out, that this tool is divinely inspired too, and we can have faith that it will play out in a good way.
So during the one follow-up on that is on the debate on the floor, I remember the case was being made that the purpose of this was not to force a convention in the first place, but rather what happens is that as the number of states approach that magical 34, where it would have to be called, Congress says to itself, are we going to let these guys take care of it, or are we going to take care of it? And so I think part of the rationale to do this was that we wanted to add our name to the 28 other states that had said yes, many of you said, like you said, are red, to force Congress to take care of something that should have taken care of a long time ago. Is that an accurate representation?
Absolutely. And yeah, I think that the likelihood is that if we get to 32 or 33 states that Congress will take action, I don't think they want the states or a convention of states to take this issue out of their hands.
So Representative Schertz and Representative Tanner brought this to the floor, and I thought it was a very effective debate. The best part of our caucus is that there's a lot of voices, and we discuss things, and then we come up with a vote, and then we move on to the next thing we need to do. Absolutely.
I had a lot of fun with the debate. I enjoyed hearing the voices for the convention, and actually I enjoyed hearing the debates against. It was a lot of fun.
And I believe that you ended it by saying, "Win one for the Gipper." Is that
yes,
your
sir.
line?
Yes, sir. That was my line.
Well done. Well played.
Reagan's birthday, we had to throw out a tribute to him.
Well played.
Thanks.
Now let's talk about, you are on the Rev and Tax. You're the chair of Revenue and Tax. And the budget is the big issue this year, right? So the budget monitor in December showed that we thought revenue would be $5.553 billion. We'd have a deficit of $40.3 million. A month later, our deficit became a surplus of $106 million. And then there was some adjustments made to the revenue based on improving revenue coming into the state. We moved it to $5.665 billion, and then our surplus was estimated at $118 million. So you can see that the trends there. Everyone, of course, the media seized on the $40 million deficit, and no one seems to have corrected the record now that it's gone to a surplus. Just for the record. But how do you look at that as a revenue and tax person? How are you following the budget monitor and those numbers on a monthly basis to figure out what you could have come through your committee?
Yes. So for me, I look at things from a high altitude viewpoint when it comes to stuff like the budget. I do look at the trends and the revenue projections and so forth. For the first time this year, I was on the committee that dealt with the revenue projections and submitted the number to JFAC that we thought that they should adopt, and they did adopt it. I will say that with regard to that number that you referenced and that we did adopt and recommended to JFAC and that JFAC did adopt, I felt like in the end that was a pretty conservative number. And so, the governor and his administration had made some projections that were early on in the game. I think the numbers came in much higher than expected in terms of tax revenue in December.
Yes.
And so, anyway, by the time we had this hearing as a committee, the experts were all giving us testimony as to the fact that the revenue projection accurately should be $200 or $300 million above what the governor and his administration had submitted. And so, anyway, my own personal revenue projection was higher than what the committee ended up feeling comfortable with and passing. What we passed was, in essence, middle ground between the low numbers that had come out before these December numbers had come in, and the very highest numbers, which were based on the projections from the tax commission and others that had the benefit of these numbers from December. So that's a starting point. Is I think that we've adopted revenue projections that are fairly conservative, but to me, what I also like to take into account that I think sometimes gets lost in the shuffle is the idea that we need to balance the budget year to year, yes, but also in a way that accounts for where we want to go as a state over time.
Right.
And I think sometimes that time element is lost in the shuffle. If you don't mind me just kind of taking off on this one, I recently read a book, and it's called Transcend, and it is a book which takes the pyramid of needs that Maslow is kind of famous for, and it reimagines those as a sailboat instead of a pyramid, with the basic needs and the security and safety needs being the hull of the boat, and then the growth and exploration needs being the sail of the boat. And as I read that, I thought, man, this is a metaphor for tax policy, and I saw that and I can't unsee it. And anyway, I think that sometimes we get so locked into the hull of the boat and taking care of the present security needs, and we lose sight of the importance of the sail and the powering of the economy forward.
Forward, right.
Yeah, right on. If you look at, another way to look at this is in investing, you have the rule of 72, and that basically says you take your interest rate, and if you divide 72 by the interest rate,
that's how many years your money will double.
that's how long it'll take for your money to double. So if you apply that to the state in terms of growth, if we grow at 1%, then our economy will double in 72 years. If we grow at 2%, our economy will double in 36 years.
Yeah.
And if we grow at 3%, then that's
24
down to
years.
24 years.
Yep.
And so little changes in, the incentives that we give might have a little change in the amount of growth in the economy, but it's going to have a huge impact. And as we look at the resources that are going to be available to fix the hull of the boat
Right.
in 24 years or 30 years or 50 years, then these little changes are going to matter a lot. And so it's important to keep in mind the importance of growth.
And also with your analogy, the analogy would be the velocity of the wind into the sail. So the more you can accelerate the velocity of the wind, the economy grows, the state tax grows. We are a much stronger state.
Absolutely. I love it. And we can control that wind by incentivizing hard work, by incentivizing innovation and invention, by incentivizing the good things that we want our people to do and that can play a role in how strong that wind
And
is.
strong tax policy, giving money to the people to let them do with it, and the multiplier effect that has through the economy.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about the big, beautiful bill, because obviously through your committee would come conformity, I imagine.
Yes.
With the big, beautiful bill. Tell people about what conformity is and what your committee actually decided to do relative to conformity and the size of that tax cut.
Yeah. Thank you. So tax conformity is, we do this every year in Idaho. We have a system in place where we have largely conformed to the IRS tax code, but we don't automatically do it, so we have to revisit it every year. Oftentimes, and the benefit of doing that is that when you fill out your federal tax form, there's a line there that becomes the starting point for your Idaho state tax form.
Very easy.
Very easy, very simple, very efficient. And so if we don't conform, then we kind of lose some built-in savings and efficiency that come from conformity. Oftentimes, in fact, the majority of times since I've been here at least, that conformity is very simple because there's no changes to the IRS tax code.
Right.
And so it's just a matter of saying, hey, this doesn't change anything. We're just going to change the start date by a year, and we're going to change the end date by a year. And it's a very simple bill that goes through early in the session most years. This year, it was different because we have the big, beautiful bill that really nobody was anticipating, and it makes sweeping changes to the IRS tax code. And so we're faced with, okay, do we conform with that? And conformity would mean adopting in Idaho, say, the provisions that are no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, some car interest that isn't taxed, and so forth. Really, there are like 39 provisions that it changed, but those are some of the big ones. So the fiscal note on that turns out to be about $155 million for this year and about $175 million for next year. And so you talked about the revenue numbers and the expense numbers of the state and how they were a little bit out of whack. And then by the adjustments, we were, by a little margin, we were balanced. But we kind of undid that by passing the big, beautiful bill. I was fully in favor of passing the big, beautiful bill, in part because I just think it doesn't make sense to give back the savings and efficiency and time that we have through conformity and what that does to making it a little easier to file taxes.
So basically what you did is your Revenue Taxation Committee decided to conform to the federal bill, and then you send that money along to JFAC, say, okay, JFAC, here's the impact. So put that in when you're thinking about the budget for Idaho, pencil this stuff in. We think it's about $155 million of tax cuts for Idahoans from the big, beautiful bill in 2026, 175 in 2027. Now, the fortunate thing is the number that the governor had, which is about $5.553 billion, was increased to about $5.665 billion because of what you said. Revenue's coming in a little bit better. So we're very blessed to have that increase almost pay for the big, beautiful bill. So here's a question. We are legendary in Idaho for tax cuts. You have a Speaker of the House who's very motivated by it. The former chair of the Revenue and Tax, very motivated with tax cuts. We like to do our own Idaho tax cuts. Now that this federal government has done big, beautiful bill and we're conforming with it, yes, that's a tax cut. But do you see, maybe not this year, but do you think we'll go back to our long-term, as you say, the hull of the boat, the sail of tax cuts going forward?
Great question. I hate to get out ahead of the discussion, this year's discussion, too much. And so I'm just going to say, I do agree with you that the Speaker is very motivated by tax cuts and the good that it does and the wind into the sails that it creates for our sailboat, in our metaphor. I think that the majority leader shares that view, and I think, frankly, that I share that view. But I don't want to get out ahead of ourselves on that. I think that I'll go back to what I said about, being a defense attorney. I'll point out that when we have jury trials, one of the instructions that is given to jurors is don't go into the jury room and immediately vote on this, because people have a tendency, once they go public with what they believe, they have a tendency to let pride and stubbornness prevent them from listening with an open mind. And so I don't want to get out ahead of my skis on this, other than to say that I'm a big believer in the power of growth, and I think that the growth oftentimes stems from tax cuts.
Right, that the people know what to do with their money better than the government does.
Oh, absolutely.
And by the way, if this was a trial, you would see property tax cut, income tax cut, corporate tax cut, or you just see cut after cut. So the evidence would suggest that this will continue. And we've done $6 billion of tax cuts over the last 5 years. We are one of the lowest tax burdens in the country, and that's something to be celebrated.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more.
So we thank you for joining the Idaho House Republicans podcast, Representative David Cannon. Again, David represents Legislative District 30, sits in seat A, and he's in his third term. And as we always say before we sign off on our podcast, God bless the great state of Idaho, and thank you once again, Representative David Cannon.
Amen. And thank you, Vic, for having me. It's been an honor.
We've loved having you.
Sunrise on the Snake River Plain, red, white, and blue in the window pane. Work boots dusty from yesterday, but we're back at it the Idaho way.